The metal milk sat in the corner of the barrack like any other container, dull, and coated with a thin layer of frost from the endless winter that surrounded the camp. To the German guards, it was nothing but a piece of farm equipment repurposed to carry boiling water or ration soup. But to the prisoners of Stalag VB, the can was something very different. Inside that battered container, hidden beneath a false bottom hammered into place by hands that pretended to be clumsy, lived a secret. A crude but functional radio receiver, built from scavenged wire, broken headphones, rusted coils, razor blades, and the metallist lining of discarded food wrappers. Every night, when the guards' boots faded into the snow, a small group of prisoners gathered around the can. They looked like desperate men huddled for warmth, but, in truth, they were tuning into the outside world. Tonight, however, the air felt different. Johannes Hawk Larsen, a Norwegian engineer captured during a failed sabotage attempt, carefully adjusted the copper coil hidden inside. His fingers trembled not from fear, but from cold. The barracks had no insulation. The wind seeped through the planks like knives. The prisoners waited. No one spoke. A faint crackle emerged from the headphones. Then a voice, British, clear, confident. Repeat. Allied forces advancing from the west. Estimated movement through northern France continues without delay. The prisoners exchanged looks, hopeful, stunned, electrified. But Hawk didn't smile. Because he knew something the others didn't. The Germans were suspicious. One of their patrols had found odd scratches on the metal can during a surprise inspection the day before. If they even imagined a radio was inside. Executions, torture, collective punishment. The stakes were higher than ever. Hawk removed the headphones and placed the false bottom back into position. Outside, distant guard dogs barked wildly at something unseen. The night was no longer safe. Something was getting closer. And the radio that shouldn't exist might soon become the one thing that doomed them all. Faye, NB, NM, Che, and the barracks of Stalag VB housed men from all over Europe. British commandos, French partisans, Norwegian resistance fighters, and even a handful of Soviet survivors who had somehow lived long enough to reach this camp instead of dying in the freezing pits of the East. They shared almost nothing except hunger and a hatred for silence. Not the silence of a winter night, but the silence of not knowing, of being cut off from the world beyond the barbed wire. That silence crushed the spirit more than the cold ever could. Hawk had broken that silence once, months earlier, when he secretly assembled the first version of the Melken radio. The device had been crude, barely functional, but the first night it picked up a faint BBC signal, the barracks transformed. Men who had not smiled in a year suddenly sat upright, breaths catching, realizing the war continued and the Allies were fighting back. The pact they formed around that moment was unspoken, but absolute. Protect the radio, protect each other, or die trying. Over time, they added new listeners. Each man took turns guarding the window while Hawk tuned the coil. Others scavenged parts. A French electrical worker smuggled a piece of carbon from a broken lamp. A British POW contributed half a headphone set he'd buried weeks earlier. A Soviet prisoner found insulated wire wrapped around a stovepipe. And all of it, impossibly, ended up inside that milk can. But now, after the suspicious guard inspection, the group had a problem. Someone had to move the radio. Somewhere safer, somewhere the Germans wouldn't think to look. During the morning roll call, Hawk whispered to the Frenchman beside him, "They know something. We have 1 day at most." The Frenchman's eyes narrowed. "You want to move it?" Hawk nodded. "To where?" And Hawk's answer chilled him. "The infirmary." The infirmary was the most dangerous place in the camp. The Germans checked everything, every bandage, every container, every drawer, which was exactly why they would never expect a radio to be hidden there. Or so Hawk hoped. The infirmary smelled of iodine, mold, and old sweat. The German medic, Feldwebel was known to be strict, but indifferent. He followed orders without cruelty, but he inspected supplies with obsessive precision. Hawk entered under the pretext of repairing a broken wooden crate. It wasn't unusual for prisoners to assist with small tasks. What was unusual was the milk can strapped under his coat. The false bottom inside rattled softly with every step. Hawk silently prayed. Kruger wouldn't he hear it? The medic sat at his desk, reading reports with half-moon glasses perched on his nose. Hawk approached slowly. "Crate repair," Kruger muttered without looking up. "Yes, Herr Feldwebel." Kruger's eyes flicked up for a second, just long enough to confirm the prisoner wasn't trying anything foolish, then returned to his paperwork. Hawk exhaled. He moved to the side room, set down his tools, and waited. Seconds ticked by. He moved to the side room, set down his tools, and waited. Seconds ticked by. But it wasn't T. Kruger. It was a British prisoner named Miller, pale and limping, with a bandage around his leg. "You're doing it now," Miller whispered. "No choice," Hawk answered. "Tonight, they'll search again." Miller pointed toward a cabinet filled with glass jars. "That one. Bottom drawer. No one touches it." Hawk knelt and opened the drawer. It was filled with old bandages, cracked bottles, and a thick layer of dust. "Perfect." He lifted the can, but just as he started to slide it inside, Kruger's voice thundered from the doorway. "Was machen Sie dort?" Hawk slowly turned. The medic's gaze went from the can to the drawer, to Hawk's trembling hands. Time froze. "Is that a water can?" Kruger asked suspiciously. Hawk swallowed. "Yes, Herr Feldwebel. I was told to store it here." Kruger stepped closer, then closer. Hawk could hear his heartbeat pounding in his ears. Finally, Kruger reached out and tapped the can with a knuckle. A hollow metallic ring echoed. The medic exhaled. "Very well. Leave it," and he walked away. Hawk didn't breathe again until the door shut. The radio had survived by a hair. For a week, the radio remained hidden in the infirmary drawer. Each night, 2 prisoners sneaked in under the pretense of assisting with chores, listening to broadcasts with the cabinet door cracked open just enough for the headphones to slip through. Hope returned. They learned of Allied progress, of resistance movements rising, of German troops struggling on both fronts. These broadcasts spread silently from barrack to barrack. Men who had given up began planning, dreaming, surviving again. But their hope came with a cost. One night, as Hawk tuned to the coil, the faint metallic sound of a rifle bolt sliding into place echoed from the hallway. He froze. Then, Aufmation! Open up! A German officer entered with 2 guards. They had received an anonymous tip. The prisoners have built something. Hawk didn't know who betrayed them. Rival prisoners? A forced informant? A terrified man trying to save himself. The officer approached the cabinet. "Open it." Hawk hesitated for half a second too long. A guard shoved him aside and yanked the drawer open, revealing Beneja's bottles. Dust. No more adieu. The false bottom worked, but then the officer did something Hawk didn't expect. He lifted the entire can. "Why is this so heavy?" he asked. Hawk's mind raced. He needed to buy time. "Water," he said. "Frozen." "It's cold." The officer frowned. Then he held the can closer to his ear. Inside, a loose wire shifted. A faint metallic rattle escaped. Not loud, but loud enough. "What is inside this?" the officer demanded. Hawk's pulse spiked. He prepared for the worst. But before the officer could open it, a sudden commotion erupted outside. Gunshots, shouting, the guard dogs barking madly. A prisoner escape attempt unrelated, chaotic, desperate. The officer threw the can aside and stormed out, yelling orders. The radio survived again. But Hawk knew their luck would not last forever. He prepared for the worst. But before the officer could open it, a sudden commotion erupted outside. Gunshots, shouting, the guard dogs barking madly. A prisoner escape attempt unrelated, chaotic, desperate. The officer threw the can aside and stormed out, yelling orders. The radio survived again. But Hawk knew their luck would not last forever. Static, more static. Then a voice broke through. Allied forces approaching the region. German command retreating in several sectors. Liberation of multiple camps underway. Men cried openly. Static, more static. Then a voice broke through. Allied forces approaching the region. German command retreating in several sectors. Liberation of multiple camps underway. Men cried openly. Miller covered his face, shoulders shaking. A Soviet prisoner whispered, "Bas-à-moi." After all this time? But then the transmitter crackled again. Expect German reprisals. All prisoners in Axis territory at extreme risk remain hidden, if possible. Help is coming. That last line hung in the air. Help is coming. Moments later, a siren wailed across the camp. Lights flared. Boots pounded. A German unit marched toward the infirmary. The radio had been discovered. The betrayal was real. Hawk stood, grabbed the can, and looked into the eyes of the men who had relied on him. No words were needed. They knew. He sprinted into the snow, gunfire erupting behind him, bullets kicking up bursts of white powder as he ran toward the tree line. If he could escape, if he could destroy the can, he could protect the others. He reached the edge of the forest. One last bullet struck the snow near his feet. He hurled the can into the ravine. Tea shattered. Wires spilled out like veins. The secret died before the Germans could find it. Hawk fell moments later, captured but alive. He would survive the war. And decades afterward, in a museum in Norway, a reconstructed version of the Milcan radio would stand in a glass case-proof of what desperate, determined men created when the world tried to silence them. A story of ingenuity, of resistance, of hope carried through static, and of a milk can that changed the fate of an entire camp.